إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. فمن يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله الميامين وأصحابه الطيبين وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. خطبة الجمعة was decreed شرعت لذكر الله, was decreed for the remembrance of Allah as a community, a communal remembrance of Allah. But the communal remembrance of Allah is to take place in the context of a communal act of contemplating التعبد في أمور العبادة, that is contemplating the implications and the meaning of dhikrullah, or the remembrance of Allah communally. So Khutbah al-Jum'ah is not simply an act in which an individual mentions broad, general reminders to the community to worship and to fast and to be upright and to be moral, but it is a collective act of remembrance of Allah and the implications in our language today of religiosity, of religious affairs in the world in which we live in. In other words, our impact upon the world and the way that the world impacts us. To put it in the most simple matter, that Jumu'ah, this weekly communal coming together, is a time in which the community is called upon to remind of itself of the most pressing matters that surrounds it, and the relationship of or the ways that these pressing affairs of the community connect to and interact with and are impacted by, and in turn impact the remembrance of Allah, which is our very religion. Our whole Islam is about dhikrullah, it's about the remembrance of Allah. A khutbah to Jum'ah that remains theoretical, abstract, distracted from the affairs of the community, it hasn't served its function. And because of that, we are under an obligation to think about and to address and to stimulate thinking about current challenges, current problems, current issues, and not simply stay at the level of simply stay in the safe zone of generalities and speculative matters. Now, there is, I think, little doubt that there are an overriding problem with two components to it that has an overwhelming impact upon all Muslim communities in the West, but more specifically in the United States, regardless of where you are. And one can sum it up is that there are consistent acts of ugliness committed. Individuals, whether in some form invoking Islam, invoking Islamic symbolism, for instance, it suffices if these individuals scream out Allahu Akbar as they commit vile, immoral, criminal acts, but invoking archetypes of Islamicity as they commit acts of terror, acts that terrify the communities in which they live, and again, for the time being, regardless of why they commit these acts and regardless of who is behind these acts. But the pressing problem is that we have a sufficient number of individuals, or even, I mean, if there is one already is too much. So when I say a sufficient number, it suffices that it's more than one. That individuals that commit horrendous acts that cause fear and terror in their communities. And then the second component is that these acts of ugliness, these acts of qubh and fasad and corruption on the earth, in the earth, is quickly acts as fuel, as fodder, as if an energizing force from hell to individuals who are already prone to targeting Muslims, either because they are in themselves religiously intolerant, or because they are in themselves full with insecurities and are looking for a perceived weaker community than themselves to target, regardless of why. But the fact is that then individuals, whether these individuals are like the current presidential candidate Donald Trump, or like a senator that uses these acts as evidence that there is an irreconcilable difference between evil and inferior Islam and superior and good Judeo-Christian civilization, and that Muslims living where we live today, i.e. in the West, in the United States, are a problem requiring a solution in some form. So there are two components, the acts of ugliness committed and the way that these acts of ugliness fuel acts of hate and intolerance and stereotyping, which we collectively refer to as Islamophobia. Now, when it comes to the acts of intolerance themselves, I've written, as I'm sure most of you know, I've written already about this, and I don't want to repeat myself I don't want to replicate the same points, but it's quite remarkable that theologically the form of ugliness that we see, the form of ugliness which typically takes the format of individuals, and I'm talking here about acts of ugliness committed especially in the West. Typically an individual who has not grown up in a godly environment, has not been weaned and raised in the love of Allah, and has not been weaned and raised in the understanding of rahmatullah and at-tarahum bayn al-abd wa rabbih, the mercy and compassion that is the definition of the relationship that surrounds a Muslim and a Muslim's God, Allah, or God's self, as well as the impact of that Muslim upon their surrounding. So these are individuals that, for whatever reason, in the most prototypical scenario that we see all the time, are individuals who have serious social adaptation problems. There are individuals who quite often have not practiced their faith, have not contemplated their faith, have not, in fact, in their daily lives, not been prone to either performing mercy and compassion, beneficence, or receiving mercy and compassion or beneficence. They have been typically unkind to their families, especially parents, although that is a major sin, and they have typically committed other sins, whether it's the consumption of alcohol, the extramarital sexual relations, drug use, etc., etc. And then they are recruited to commit an act of extreme violence, whether it is driving a truck in a crowded group of people. Not the indoctrination is such that it is not important whether their victims are Muslim or not Muslim, and in that sense they have a sense of equality about them. They hate everyone equally. They don't make much of a distinction between a Muslim and a non-Muslim. Or they go into a church and slit the throat of a priest, or indeed, as just past week, grab a child, a Palestinian child from a Palestinian camp, and sever his head altogether, decapitate the child. But it is always an act that shocks the senses and shocks our consciousness with our present day sensibilities of cruelty, and act shocking to the senses, acts that strike us as inherently and fundamentally unreasonable. Now, of course, the Quran tells us specifically that when Allah addresses those who are the true believers, and the true believers, Allah tells us that الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَلَمْ يَلْبُسُوا إِيمَانَهُمْ بِظُلْمٍ, those who believe and have not exploited their belief to commit acts of injustice. That doesn't seem to matter for these folks, because in the quibble with you that what we are doing are not acts of injustice, although it is not necessary it's not important whether they see their acts are unjust or not, because from justice is not when your behavior is going to impact others. Justice is not contingent on a personalized, self-referential point of view, but justice is always defined from a communal point of view. And I'm talking about human justice here. I'm not talking about divine justice or haqq, which is entirely objective. But social justice itself, the minute your action is going to impact upon others, then how you personally perceive how you personally define your acts, whether you personally see your acts as just or unjust, is not the material point. The material point is how those impacted by your actions see your behavior. So those who are going to be they're going to pay the cost for your actions, we come to them and we ask them, is the cost you're paying a fair cost? That's one thing that we consider. And second, whether the ijma', the consensus, the collectivity of the social unit of Muslims see this act as just or unjust. And in matters of human justice, social justice, and whether when we assess, and I mean it's a different khutbah altogether, the relationship between social justice or human justice and divine justice or abstract justice, but it is indisputable that divine justice, the haqq, can never be used to ignore consideration of social justice. It's one thing if, as an act of, because of my belief as to divine justice, as to haqq, I say I will not take part in doing so and so. In other words, I abstain from behavior. I don't hurt anyone, but I abstain from partaking in behavior. That becomes a matter of self-conscientious, an act of self-conscientious objection or non-participation. But it is a completely different matter when a personalized, self-referential notion of idiosyncratic justice, saying, well, because I believe this to be the haqq, because I believe this to be the transcendental justice, I am going to act aggressively, act affirmatively and aggressively to deny others their rights. So I'm not acting as a conscientious objector, but I am acting as a an affirmative violator. There's a world of difference between the two, because in the first, it is your reliance on what you believe to be the divine right makes you abstain from participating. You see a war, for instance, you say, I believe this war to be unjust, although everyone seems to think it's socially just, so you say, I'm not going to take part in it. I abstain from taking part in it. This is this act of imtina is one thing, but it's a world of difference to say, well, because I see idiosyncratically this war to be just, although the vast majority of people around me do not see it the way I see it, for you to say, well, I am going to take it upon myself to declare war as an individual, or me and my idiosyncratic group. So this Quranic reference that your iman and la yulbas bizulmin, that your iman does not become a justification for committing acts of injustice, is entirely ignored by these individuals that we see proclaiming Allahu Akbar as they commit extreme acts of ugliness. What is among what is ignored, the numerous Quranic references that إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ مَنْ كَانَ خَوَّانًا أَثِيمًا, that Allah, the very nature of the divine, does not love those who betray and those who strike through ghadr, as we will see in a second, that those who strike through trickery and through lies and deceit and betrayal. There's among the narratives of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, there was a fellow, his name escapes me, one second. Abu Basir. A fellow known as Abu Basir, who after Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, after the peace agreement between the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslim community and Quraysh, known as the Peace Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Abu Basir converts to Islam. The Meccans find out that he has converted to Islam, so they arrest him. And upon arresting him, he manages to kill his guards and escape to Medina. And among the things, he grabs the possessions that were on the persons of the guards that he killed. The remark of the Prophet ﷺ when Abu Basir comes to him is quite telling. When Abu Basir comes to the Prophet ﷺ and tells him, this is what I've done, the Prophet refuses to accept any of the so-called booty, war booty, or material that he picked up from the bodies of the guards that he killed, and tells him, لا يصلح في ديننا الغدر فإن الله جاعل لك ولمن معك من المسلمين فرجا ومخرجا. That in our will, and not only refuses to accept what Abu Basir offers him materially, but refuses to accept Abu Basir himself, sends him away, and says, in our religion, betrayal is not accepted. Killing the guards to free yourself, to escape, is ghadr, is betrayal. So what should I have done? You should have endured. You would have rather endured patiently your trial and tribulation in being arrested by Mecca, rather than stab someone in the back and run away. Tell them, لا يصلح في ديننا الغدر. In our religion, ghadr, betrayal, cannot be accepted. Rather, the way our path is to rely on Allah to facilitate a way out for you, to facilitate a solution, to facilitate a rahmah, to facilitate a blessing. In other words, it's as if he is telling him, the fact that you have not been patiently trusted Allah, and instead of committing, you should have rather suffered, patiently suffered, rather than committing betrayal, made you not among us, and we cannot accept you in our community. A stronger, exemplary, or a stronger manifestation or application of the repeated Quranic references that Allah does not love the Khawan, the Asim, the Khawan, the traitor and a betrayer, is not possible. That even killing your guards with the existence of a peace treaty, the fact that you believe, Abu Basir personally, that this peace treaty is not just, or that you're not bound by it personally, is immaterial. Because the only thing you can do, if you personally believe that it is unjust, as long as there is a consensus against you, is to refrain from transgressing or that refrain from engaging in behavior that could possibly transgress upon the rights of others. We have often in our theological in the way that we've perceived the Sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ and his experience in Medina, we often marginalized the highly ideal and idealistic elements in it by as if saying, well, you know, the Sunnah of the Prophet when it comes to things that are marginal and unimportant, things like how you wear your jilbab or how you wear your beard or whether you put eyeliner or whether you use this type of iqra or not, you find many of us give that a great deal of significance. But the morality and the ethics of politics and the morality of social behavior is not given nearly the same amount of attention or significance. It reminds me, I once wrote an article when I was still a young man about the relationship. It was about the hypocrites of Medina, and in it I wondered. Allah repeatedly tells the Prophet ﷺ that there are hypocrites among you. And in fact, Allah tells the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُهُمْ, that Allah knows who the hypocrites are, even if you, Muhammad, don't know who the hypocrites are. All of you know that, right? And I wondered, why doesn't Allah tell the Prophet, considering how precarious the condition of the state in Medina is? I mean, this is a small, isolated little town surrounded by an alliance of hostile tribes, plus the Empire of Persia, plus the Empire of the Byzantines. So, you know, why wouldn't Allah just allow the Prophet ﷺ to cleanse house? Just tell him who the hypocrites are, and then the Prophet can either kill them or jail them or at least kick them out of Medina. And when you look at the seerah of the Prophet, and you find that even if, and here the Prophet ﷺ tells us that even if when Allah tells me that such and such is a munafiq, I may not take any positive act of prosecution against them. Why? Because this is the perspective of haqq, the wahy that Allah tells the Prophet, here is a list of your munafiqun. But the Prophet ﷺ tells us, but from the perspective of social justice, i.e. the perspective of, in our modern terminology, procedural justice, that is insufficient grounds for me to come to people who deny being traitors and deny being hypocrites, and to act in an exceptional fashion before them, because that breeds in society suspicion and the habit of accusing people of being traitors. So remarkably, in this article I wrote, that it is quite remarkable that, and it highly instructive and illuminating, that although the Prophet ﷺ knows there are hypocrites living amongst them, he does not give himself the right, and he is a prophet from God, to abduct them, to give an order to assassinate them, to imprison them, etc., etc. And I said that this should be highly educative for anyone that thinks about the morality of Islamic politics or ethics. And I received a response from the editor saying, this is highly idealistic, and sorry, we can't publish your article. This reminds me of the story of Abu Basir, right? Most of us today say, well, what do you mean if I am imprisoned unjustly? Why can't I kill my guards and make a run for it? And we see this in Hollywood all the time. I mean, the CIA hero or the special forces hero is arrested, is captured by someone, kills their guards and makes a run for it, and we receive him as a hero. But and again, in the platform of the Usuli Institute, nothing is said in an authoritarian, conclusive manner. In other words, we can have discussions about this, but the fundamental, basic moral issue is that acts, the clearer you get to clear-cut acts of betrayal and treason, the more red zone the situations are, the more we can agree that they are clear-cut, impermissible. And then there are, gradations. We go into gradations of less clear moral issues. So if I am somewhere and an unjust ruler sends soldiers to arrest me, and I can hit one on the head and make an escape for it, is this ethical or not? And this is a ruler known for his injustice. If I avoid lethal force, is this these are more gray zone issues, and very different from killing people who are attending festivities and plowing a car from them, which is a clear-cut act of betrayal and violating the trust that people have given you. Or going and sneaking into a church and slitting the throat of a priest, that's clear-cut act of betrayal and placing trust, the trust that people have given in you. So what is quite remarkable is that the most basic ethic that our Iman has indoctrinated into us, beyond other than beneficence and mercy, to be beneficent and merciful, which of course these folks, the ISIS folks and Qaeda folks and all these groups violate left and right, is to nurture trust and to foster the trust and trustworthiness. And in fact, as I'm sure all of you have read, that the way that Islam spread in numerous regions, in Indonesia and Malaysia and Africa, was through the mere trustworthiness of Muslim merchants. The fact that Muslim merchants, unlike today, when someone is a Muslim, it was enough to know that this is a person that I do business with, because they are remarkably honest, and trustworthy. I want to comment briefly on the second element, and that is, now that we have this serious disease, this endemic, infectious disease of having certain individuals act in ways that violate the very essence of the Islamic message, what have we done about it? And why has it become, why the impact of these acts of betrayal and acts of ugliness becomes so widespread? In the second khutbah, Allah yastajib lakum. Bismillah, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa subhanallah, Allahu Akbar, wa la ilaha illallah, Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa tabahu bi ihsan ila yawm al-din. There is a failure on two fronts. One is somewhat beyond us, and that is the failure of developing and nurturing and what is the right word I'm looking for, but fostering, but even more than that, I even want to use more academic terms, if you will, interrogating and analytically developing Islamic ethics in general. There is a betrayal of our own tradition, in that as intellectuals we have not gone back to look at our tradition and do a systematic self-review of an understanding of the ontology of Islamic ethics, the deontology of Islamic ethics, the epistemological elements of Islamic ethics, and all of that, as you know, are ways of saying the hierarchy and the physiological and skeletal and physiological buildup of Islamic ethics. It's been done by scholars, individual scholars here and there, in this century, in that century, and so on. But it's always been, for the most part, an individual effort by an individually gifted scholar acting in their individual capacity. Right? Second, even if and when these scholars would reach a conclusions and realizations that are appropriate for addressing our day and age, in other words, they transform, they apply critical insight to the tradition, develop theories of ethics and morality from that tradition, and then even figure out a way of transforming that moral ethical tradition into a language appropriate for our day and age. Even that, when that happens, there has been a thorough failure among Muslims who are, even especially Muslims in countries where despotism is because despotism is an ultimate evil that kills ideas and kills the spread of thought. But even Muslims who are not in despotic countries, not in despotic environments, they've been an ultimate failure in spreading this moral discourse and this ethical discourse, in teaching and educating this moral discourse and this ethical discourse, in allowing from a child to a college age youth to a middle-aged businessman or businesswoman to a what I don't know what age political activist man or woman to understand the implications and the meanings of Islamic ethics and Islamic morality. And here I must go back to what the Quran teaches us, that no people fail without first, who are the first to go corrupt in, after of course the hukam, the rulers, which by their nature power corrupts, and unless they are extremely, unless you lay all types of rules and have a very powerful incentive system to prevent power from corrupting, power corrupts. That's its nature. And the only way to minimize the corrupting influence of power is through a process, setting out a process that makes those with power forced to be transparent and accountable. But other than those rulers, which is the first class of people to be open to corruption, and when they spoil, when they go sour, the rest of the rest of the body of the Muslim Ummah or the Muslim community or the Muslim group becomes sour itself, are mutrafiha, those who are the wealthy in a society. أمرنا مترفيها فسقوا فيها فحق عليهم القول فدمرناها تدميرا. The mutrafin, those who are well off, those who are rich, as Allah teaches us that teaches us a process of decay, and it says that the rich become corrupted to the degree of fusuq, and when that happens, destruction and decay is inevitable. It's just a matter of time. And when I say in the particular example of Muslims in the West, in what sense are those who are well off, in what sense does this apply to them? Number one, I want to quickly address the ethics of giving. Most Muslims are raised with the ridiculous idea that if they pay the zakah 2.5% on what has been saved for an entire year, they've purified their money and done their duty. While those who study the Islamic seerah, and again, something that we completely leave aside, the zakah is what is it's like the bare minimum, like salah and saum, for you to count as a Muslim. But the sadaqah, that unless you perform, you are on either sinning or on the verge of sinning, is every dime that exceeds what your need for every dime or every cent or every whatever umla or whatever dinar or whatever it is, every dollar that exceeds your basic needs, that you do not spend at least in a year, some say the khums, 1/5, and some say the khums, 5%, or some say the ush, 10%. That at least 5% or at least 10% must be spent on the way for your cause, and I'll talk about that in what cause. But and for your information, the most jurists say that, especially when it comes to those who are above, who have reached the point of meeting their needs and their necessities and their needs, their daruriyat and hajiyat, when it comes to luxuries, then the percent rises to 30% of, so if your money, and here, let's again, to be clear, that a study of and being honest in discourse about the way that we perceive what is a need and what is a necessity, and what is a necessity should come first, what is a darura, and what is a hajiyya, what is a need, and what is a tahsiniyya or a luxury, in itself needs a severe self-critical and analytical perspective. Because we've reached a point where we think of a second car for the family as a necessity. It's neither, while in my view, it cannot be a necessity, and rarely can rise to the level of a need, but will in most cases be in the category of a luxury. When you read in the Islamic tradition, you read that ما فاض عن جب واحد, that what is beyond one what we'll say today, one dress, one good dress, or one suit. Anything beyond one has exceeded the level of necessity, and now we're either talking about the 5% or the 10% or the 30%. How many of us even think at that level today? But why am I bringing the money issue? Because as Allah has taught us through the legacy of the seerah of the Prophet والسلام, to talk about principles and ethics and studies and all of that, without the financial backing to allow هؤلاء الذين يتفقهون في الدين, as the Quran says, that there are those of you who go serve in the way of God by their bodies, and then those of you who remain behind يتفقهوا في الدين, to study and reflect and to analyze their religion. وَلِيُنذِرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ إِذَا رَجَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ, to educate their people if they come back to them. We have grown accustomed to this being taken care of by corrupt governments, like وزارة الأوقاف or وزارة الشؤون الدينية. While we live blissfully, completely self-absorbed and completely a selfish existence of saying, well, I take care of my family and that's it. Without the infaq fi sabilillah, without spending in the way of God. And the jihad of today is not the jihad of weapons and arms that in most cases is used through the methodology of Ghadr or terrorist attacks, but it is jihad al-ilm, the power to compel intellectually, to convince epistemologically, to change the perception of people, to change the ideas of people. That is the true jihad. And when you find that we are in ummah in which even when we spend, we do not spend to further the activity of هؤلاء الذين يتفقهون في الدين لينظروا قومهم. We do not spend on institutions of learning, and especially critical and analytical learning, but we spend on building symbolic shrines for ourselves, i.e. we construct this mosque so it will be known that Dr. such and such helped in the construction of such and such mosque. But we pay no attention to what type of intellectual, ethical, moral message is empowered within our ummah. أطلت عليكم. I know that I've taken too much of your time, so I will close with this point. I will tell you there is no, through 30 years of experience among the Muslim community in the United States, there is no faster way to lose popularity in the Muslim community in the United States and the West than to make the rich feel guilty about the way they spend their money. The popular preachers, the superstars, will talk about, everything that can make the middle class and low to middle class feel guilty about the way they conduct their affairs. But when they deal with the high class or the high middle class, they'll deal with them behind closed doors, in a personalized matter of vast flattery and hypocrisy, and you are wonderful, you are great, and so on, but will never address them with the truth publicly, because there is never a way there is no surer way to lose popularity as a teacher than if you address in our society medical doctors or Wall Street businessmen or whatever, and say, the money simply spending on building mosque is not sufficient, and it's not just that, it's a waste of your money, that you have an affirmative obligation to know the awjuh jihad, the right place to spend to support the cause of Allah. And today the support of the cause of Allah must be in furthering study and knowledge, so that the da'wah, the da'wah of mercy, the da'wah of haqq, the da'wah of the ethics of trustworthiness, the da'wah and the message of godliness is established, not to simply just spend on those who come in and repeat ad nauseum, didactic, repetitive, meaningless acts of what I've called in my writing and reasoning with God the affectations of piety, but none of the substance of piety itself. But this is it. When you take the podium and you speak at Jum'ah and you address your community, you must decide from the beginning, are you offering your testimony before God, wishing popularity with your Lord or wishing popularity in your community. And that decision would affect the substance of your speech. We today are, because of our own neglect and our own self-indulgence and our own dishonesty in discourse, 80s and 90s, we've took the easy way right out by going to oil-producing countries and saying, please build our mosques for us, instead of taking the responsibility ourselves. Because we have not built institutions of higher learning, institutes and think tanks. And because even when we've built think tanks, they were basically shrines for the self-idolatry of individuals with huge egos. So medical doctor such and such builds a think tank that basically focuses on his great thought, not in medicine, but in Islamic studies, which is as bizarre as you get. So you have think tanks that do not produce real thought because they don't know what thought is. The cost we are paying today, there is no kidding about this, and no way we can deceive ourselves about this. The cost of the neglect and the malfeasance and the failure to rise up to the duties and the obligations, the taklif that Allah has placed upon us through the 70s and 80s and 90s, the result is the threat we are facing today of Donald Trump and friends. Now, if there is no, I cannot imagine a clearer wake-up call from Allah than this. If Muslims in the U.S. even survive Donald Trump, I mean, I'm half joking, but if we survive, never again. Muslims must wake up and realize that they must understand their faith better than their enemies. They must master their tradition better than their enemies do. Because right now that's not the way it is. Their enemies study the Islamic tradition much more than Muslims do. And must establish institutions capable of engaging the societies in which we live in and performing the obligation of tabligh da'watullah, transmitting the God's message and telling them what is true to the Islamic faith and what is not true, and a corruption, and in fact an utterly and beyond corruption, but an utter destruction of the very premises of the Islamic faith. Allahumma ala ballaght, Allahumma ashhad. Allah bear witness that I have warned. Allahumma afu anna waghfir lana. Allah forgive us. Allah forgive us our sins. Warhamna, and have mercy upon us. Wahdina liaqraba min hadha rashada. Allah guide us to a path more correct and better than what we have taken in the past. وانصرنا وانصر أمة الإسلام على الحق وعلى البيان. Allah help us and aid us and help the Ummah al-Islam to uphold your truth and to explain and to transmit and to convey your truth. Welcome as-salam.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد